Welcome to Tame the Taboo. This podcast is brought to you by Discover Health. Discover Health specializes in healthcare, education, and resources for her most intimate concerns. I'm your host, Nurse Jenna Ray. I'm a women's health and gender-related nurse practitioner, and I am making it my business to take you from sufferer to sensei. So if you are suffering from conditions that are not easily treated in an annual exam, or you want to join me on this journey to become my healthiest, wealthiest, best business owning self, sit back, relax, and enjoy these episodes. Hello. Welcome back to Tame the Taboo. So this week's podcast is a very special guest. Her name is Tara, and we actually met in the Instagram DMs, which is so crazy that This is the way of the world right now. But Tara is a sex educator who started this work actually in college. And I just think that she has such a unique take on delivering sex education. And so I just wanted to catch up with you and kind of see how things are going, and welcome you to the podcast, Tara.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and just to see the whole podcast come together is so exciting. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, I like to joke and say that one of my favorite things to do is just talk shit with my friends. So I'm like, now I can formalize that. Like, I can make it formal.
Honestly, I think some of the most interesting conversations I have happen off screen. So I think taking that energy and trying to put it into like my digital work is something that I do a lot. So I love more face-to-face conversations like this too.
Yeah, and have it not be scripted. It's just us, getting to know each other a little bit more. We are a little bit familiar with each other because we've done a live together. Actually, Tara invited me onto her platform to talk about HIV prevention and treatment and all the HIV work that I do as a part of Discover Health. So that was really awesome. And so I'm like, I have to introduce you to my audience. So here we go.
Yes, I am so excited to be introduced to your audience. And yeah, that was so incredible for me. I'm so grateful that you agreed to come on to that live, because I think that really was sparked by like my own personal questions about HIV prevention, about PrEP and PEP and a lot of those different topics. And so I love when I can do that like exploration and have like more nuanced conversations in that way with people who obviously know more about the subject than I do. So that was so cool for me.
Yeah. So if the girlies don't know, what is PrEP?
Yes, pre-exposure prophylaxis. So PrEP is, you could probably speak to this better than I can, but it's a preventative medication for HIV that people can take in order to decrease the likelihood of contracting HIV. And so it's often recommended for men who have sex with men, or people who have penises who are engaging in like queer sex. But I guess a lot of my questioning was about why isn't everyone on PrEP, which I think we got to have a really cool conversation about.
Yeah, and I guess my stance is still, why isn't everyone on PrEP, And I think it's because a lot of providers don't feel comfortable prescribing it and bringing it up in conversation, and therefore clients don't know that it's an option and they don't know to ask. So the more we can have conversations like this, hopefully there is someone out there like, yeah, I'm not a gay white man, right? But I might be a straight Black woman, but I'm still at risk for HIV. And hey, there is something out there that I can do to prevent myself from getting it.
Yeah, totally. I think that's such a theme I see too, that there are so many topics that queer folks are a lot more inclined to talk about that really can benefit everyone. And so that's been like a really cool part of my work, I guess, too, because I'm also queer and I get to be in a lot of those spaces living in New York City, and being somebody who talks about sex on the internet a lot, like I get to have those conversations. And the more you have them, as somebody who was also raised in a very like heteronormative way, I'm like, why wasn't I having these conversations before about things like, even sex toys or lubrications or anal play, or like all of these different conversations that happen so much more often in queer spaces. that really everyone should be talking about. Things like aftercare, the same is true for like BDSM spaces. So I try to mainstream a lot of those conversations because I think they're beneficial for everyone.
That's awesome. I think one of the positives about being in the queer community is that who you are and who you exist as in a person is kind of taboo. So you have to build the skill to learn, hey, like, who am I? This is a little bit different than, what people would expect. And so that gives you the skill of being able to ask the right questions. And like you said, have conversations that people in cis spaces don't necessarily have to have because things aren't challenged. And that's to the detriment, especially of Black women, because there are so many conversations that straight Black women need to be a part of, but we're just not in that space because, that's for them, right? Like specifically talking about HIV prevention and HIV treatment is not just a gay man's disease. Like Black women are dying and contracting HIV to this day and have been from the beginning, but our stories were never centered around HIV/AIDS, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. And I think, that reminds me too of just like what you were saying about like in heteronormative, cisnormative sexuality, like a lot of things are like assumed. And I think that just the way that cishet folks and cishet culture has defined sex as being penetrative, as being penis and vagina sex, and like queer folks obviously subvert that out of like need because there might not necessarily be a penis and a vagina, but that allows sex to be so much more expansive, and to have that be like a queer only conversation does a huge disservice to cishet women in particular who aren't, on average orgasming from that penetrative penis and vagina sex. So yeah, like that's what made me think of that. And then of course the same is like even more true for Black women who have additional barriers in order to reaching pleasure, who have the way that purity culture affects us so uniquely, who have, all of these assumptions that are placed onto us, all these stereotypes that are placed onto us and in terms of sex. So yeah, just making that more accessible for the people that it needs to be more accessible for.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk more about what your existence as like a queer young Black woman in this space of sex education, like what does that mean? It's a big deal to me. That's why I'm so excited to be connected with you, because I'm like, yeah, she's beautiful, she's young, she's talking about these things, and you don't necessarily look like what sex education looks like in a fifth grade classroom. So tell me a little bit more about that experience.
Totally. And thank you. I approached sex education knowing that I was passionate about talking about sex and not really knowing what was out there in terms of like adult oriented sex education. And really like the internet was one of, if not the first places I looked. Of course, I was, trying to read and buy as many books as possible and listening to podcasts and getting information where I could. But one of the best resources for me ended up being Instagram. And a lot of the people I was following and engaging with their content were sex educators. And I think there is kind of this notion that there aren't that many Black sex educators who are doing this work, in our small niche community. I don't think that's true. I think there are tons of Black sex educators. I think they might not have as large of platforms because there are more obstacles for them to gain a following. But they're sharing incredible information, and they deserve their flowers 1,000,000%. And so those are usually my favorite people to learn from. And I also noticed that, of course, like the conversations that were happening on larger, mainly white straight woman led platforms, they would talk about issues that of course affected them as white straight women. But I think a big part of what was lacking and what I kind of wanted to do is I wanted to take those same issues and talk about the way that they uniquely affect Black women and other women of color. Like as opposed to, I guess, just focusing on certain narratives that we hear time and time again when it comes to Black women and sex. I wanted to take every single mainstream narrative that's been super whitewashed and specifically take those and talk about them in terms of Black folks. So like I did a workshop on how purity culture uniquely affects Black folks. And I think for those of you who don't know what purity culture is, it refers to like a period of time in the US where the government was taking really adamant steps towards ensuring that people remain pure, ensuring that there was less access to sex education and things like that. And it's often talked about in like a white evangelical kind of lens where we're talking about things like purity balls and we're talking about virginity pledges and things that really predominantly affect like white Christian folks. But I wanted to talk about like Black religious folks and like the unique expectations that are put on Black people, especially people who are assigned female at birth, when you're raised in those areas. So like, yeah, thinking about how we can take the conversations that society's already having and then even like make them even more nuanced by also reminding people that like Black women exist and actually go through these things at worse rates and in worse and unique ways and are so often left out of that conversation.
So what would you say to the women who are out there who grew up in the Black church, who, had the eyes on them and you can't wear your shorts too short and you can't, look at that man this way because you already know that he's giving you red flags, but your parents and your grandparents aren't telling him, to watch his step. They're telling you to watch how you are around them. So many of us have gone through that trauma of, owning the nastiness of the old men around us, right? So what, as a sex educator, do you say to women like that who have gone through this experience?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways I resonate with that experience. I was also raised in a Southern Black Baptist family. And so even though I have the privilege of being able to talk to my parents about a lot of things and about my work, and we can have those conversations where I get to educate them on certain things that they weren't talking about when they were raised, there's no way I'm having those conversations with my grandparents or my aunts and my uncles. And I think that that's an important part of talking about it, is also recognizing that sometimes like your hands are tied. Like sometimes there's really not much to be done. And, it might be worth burning all your bridges, but it also might not be. And so if that is the case for you, finding peace and comfort where you can. So again, like social media has been a huge resource for me. And now that I'm really into being a sex educator, I feel like I have a really great sex positive community around me in real life and online. And I think obviously social media has its pros and cons, but I think one of the biggest pros is that you really get a lot more control over your own media intake than ever before. You get to choose who you follow. You get to choose what content you like, what content you engage with. And so even though you might not control the algorithms directly, you do have some say. And so using that like mindfully and consciously to really heal parts of yourself that you might not get to when you're, at church with your family or when you're hearing these things. And I also think a huge part of that, a huge factor in that, especially in regards to like creepy older men and things like that, is like rates of like child sexual assault and child sexual abuse amongst young Black women. And I think that it's really important to give ourselves the sort of the grace that you see a lot of you see a lot of people who have a lot of privilege sort of getting that space to be a victim or a survivor and to not take on the responsibility of solving all the problems around them. And I think we need to extend that to Black women, especially young Black women, where there are things that are going on in our communities that shouldn't be, and are absolutely wrong on every single level. And also, like, we can't be expected to save the world in every single regard all the time, every day.
This Black lady exceptionalism is what I call it. And me and almost all of my friends suffer from it. So I love what you're saying, this idea of like curating a community that allows you to be vulnerable and holds you to account, but doesn't put the burden of fixing everything on you.
Right.
I love
Right.
that. We deserve that. We deserve to be vulnerable, to be soft, to say this happened to me and I need to heal from it, without fixing everything for everybody else in the world. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
So tell me now, as we talk about community, tell me the project that you're working on right now. And it seems like it's a big project building out a community of sex educators and like the next generation.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So I had the idea back in November. I mean, essentially going back a little even further than that. A lot of the sex ed content that I create and the written pieces I've done and things like that have been geared towards, adults, young adults for sure, but still people who are over 18. And that was mainly because that's where I was in life. And I really do think that sex ed is a lifelong journey. And I think I'm constantly learning new things, reading new books, finding new information where I can. There's so much more sex research that needs to be done, so many questions that we haven't answered yet. But I was always really driven by the idea that I really needed a better sex education in high school. I think having been a young woman and having sex expected of me by my peers, by the men around me, and knowing nothing about my sexuality, knowing nothing about my bodily autonomy, not knowing how to set boundaries, how to stand up for myself, or even like having experienced orgasm or anything like that. You look back and it just feels so the whole experience felt so backwards. It felt like the worst possible way to learn about anything. And so I
Trial by
think a lot of
fire.
it. Sorry?
It's trial by fire. It's like,
Yes,
maybe
exactly.
you'll get it right, but probably not.
Yeah. It's so preventable in my mind. And I think a lot of, being a sex educator is realizing that if you want to give this information, there are very few places to actually provide it. Even, on social media, we're constantly facing censorship. In our real life workshops, people have to sort of opt in. And most of the people who aren't opting in are probably the people who need the information the most. And so I wanted to make it more accessible for people of that specific age bracket who I think really do need it the most, to be able to speak with, renowned sex educators, people who I've had access to through doing this work, and through creating connections in this field. And I really, really wanted to bring that to young folks. So I started a nonprofit. We are a 501c3 organization. We're so excited about this work. We have a really amazing advisory board full of really cool sex educators. We have 2 staff now. We are, we really hit the ground running. And so we're really excited. Thank you so much. It's been a lot, but it's definitely like my biggest passion at the moment. And I feel like even putting my all into it, it doesn't feel like a job most of the time. I'm like, I love this. Let's keep going. Which is
so you're aligned.
Extremely, extremely. And it's nice to have sort of the say-so around like what I'm doing. Like I've worked in this field in so many different capacities, just under different companies, organizations, doing brand deals. You're always like following the sort of guidelines. It's not like you necessarily have control over what you say and what you do, but here I do. And I try to extend that as much as possible to everybody who's working on the project with me, and really taking their their opinions into account.
That's awesome.
So
what's the name of the project, and how can the folks get involved?
Yes, we are the Youth Sexpert Program. We are www.theyouthsexpertprogram.org. We have Instagram, we have TikTok. Both are the Youth Sexpert Program with a 3 in the word sex to avoid censorship. And yeah, our applications open on June 1st for youth to enroll. And other than that, we are raising funds. So if anybody wants to donate, we'll take anything we can get at the moment. But all of that funding goes toward our guest educators who will be coming on for this semester, and really giving our students an individualized approach to really nuanced, age-appropriate sex education.
That's awesome. So you're going to have kids teaching other kids the correct language. So it's like positive peer pressure. So instead of all the, little nastiness that you heard growing up, and because that's how we learn, right? Because the information is out there, whether it's right or wrong, the kids are talking. So you're saying, I'm going to take these children and give them the knowledge that I wanted for myself as a kid and have them spread that. That's amazing. I actually got the opportunity to talk to a group of girls from a local high school, and the same kind of idea, like, let me give you as much knowledge as possible so that when you get the BS in your ear from the little boys in your classroom, you can be like, no, that is wrong. This is right.
I love that. Yes. That was exactly like my thought process was like, I think the person I needed in high school was like me, like who I've become now. And so I think that working together with a lot of people who do the same thing that I do, we could like train the next generation, is definitely the idea. And yeah, I think you're completely right. I think even with the conversations that are happening on social media or with Google and smartphones, being a sex educator, you also realize how many of these questions, of these conversations are complex, are not Googleable. They require more nuance than that. And I think that's also, why I love writing is because I get to really explore topics that aren't an easy answer. Those are my favorite topics to talk about. I think that's why I wanted to talk about PrEP and PEP, because it's not necessarily an easy answer, and it's not necessarily something that you could find just by Googling. But sort of filling in the gaps and opening dialogue around all the questions and all the issues in sexuality that are not easily answered.
That's awesome. You're a problem solver. You see a problem, you're like, how can I use my skills that God has given me and skills that I needed, as a youth? How can I empower other people to have them so that they don't have to suffer? That's awesome.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm super proud of you and the work that you're doing. I'm so happy we could reconnect again today. I hope to bring you back on the podcast again and just continue to watch your growth from afar. Know that I'm always cheering you on. And so, yeah, everybody go follow on Instagram. Where can they find you personally?
Yes, it's at tara.michaela on Instagram. I'm not super big into really any other social media platform, so mostly Instagram.
Awesome. Good. Well, thank you so much, Tara. And this has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love watching you do what you do, and engaging with your work. I love it.
Yay. All right, guys, we are out. See you next episode. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tame the Taboo. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. Send this to your girlfriend so they can join you on your journey as we transition to our healthiest, wealthiest, best selves. See you on the next episode.